This is a 2000 Saturn SL2, and it has a problem with a leaking heater to intake manifold tube. I found a video on YouTube where the guy used a Dremel tool to cut away the plastic that connected this piece to this piece. I'll refer you to that video, but this was looking solid. The way this defective manifold works is it's made from ABS, which is the first problem. Should not have that. And it has this heater tube coming here, which goes back to here, and this is the pipe or tube, sorry, hose that goes into that, right? And the tube would go something like that, right? So that's the part number for Gates 11758. If you try to use just a 3/4 inch piece of heater hose and you spin it around or try and connect it, it could kink, and that could be a problem. So what I'm gonna do here is replace the heater hose, right? So here's the old heater hose, right? And it's 19 millimeters here, and roughly 3/4 of an inch. It's like 0.745, something like that. So 3/4 tubing, right? But you can't just use any tubing. So these leak, and when they do, the entire manifold has to come off. The proper repair is you essentially move the engine as far forward as you can using some straps. You take off the fuel rail, power steering pump, a whole bunch of other stuff, throttle body, I think, I can't remember. It's quite an extensive repair, and you replace the manifold. But what some repair kits do is they have you cut this area here going straight across, because this tube here has its own gasket, and Dorman, D-O-R-M-A-N, Dorman and another company make a repair kit, but they have you put on a new manifold and a new manifold gasket, which is separate. The gasket is separate from this gasket. There's a separate gasket here because this is part of the coolant system, and that's a completely different part of the system with the intake, right? So you cut the new manifold, and then you put on this repair kit with a different gasket, and it's more solid, right? So here's the problem, well, two problems. Okay, so this is the intake manifold to expansion tank return line, and as you can see, that nipple broke off, right? So that tubing goes from the expansion tank all the way around the back, and then goes into where that nipple broke off, right? So to repair this, the way I'm doing it, I found a video on YouTube where the guy used a Dremel tool, and he cut essentially freeing the tube and making the tube independent by cutting the plastic molding between that tube and the rest of the manifold. I'm willing to give it a try because this otherwise would be a very labor-intensive repair to get the new manifold in. A lot of this stuff has to come off, and I'm not interested in doing all that. The engine mounts and a whole bunch of other stuff has to come off. You have to jack up the engine. It's a lot of work. It gets me deeper into working on an engine than I'm comfortable. So my plan is to deal with the fact that when I go to buy a replacement tube for this, I can't remember what it was, 5/16 or 1/4 inch or whatever it was. Anyway, the tube they gave me that fits on there doesn't really fit, and also it's quite a bit thicker and wider. So you have your inside diameter and your outside diameter, right? So the inside diameter needs to fit the outside diameter of this. However, the outside diameter of this takes up so much space that it barely fits on there. All right, so I was stuck because I went to the parts store to try and deal with this, and I ended up putting this on and just encasing the thing in gasket maker. So I used a ton of gasket maker and a bunch of zip ties, let it dry, and I was able to get it back. But the other part was leaking, the tube that comes out. Here's some of the stuff you're gonna need, right? Various sockets, 10 millimeter, 13 millimeter. You need these for your, what's that, 5/16, and I think a 1/4 inch, I can't remember, but you know, for your hose clamps and such. You definitely want to use a scissors or something more like that for cutting hose, not a knife, because you want to get a nice straight cut. You'd be better off with scissors. Definitely might need some of these other tools. I'll show this in a minute, but various types of zip ties. This is called plumber's tape. That comes in very handy. You're going to need that. Anyway, this is the mess that I made, and I had to clean all this stuff off. Otherwise, I would have had to tow the vehicle because it was not runnable. I went to the store, and I tried to pull off that hose to replace it because there was a leak coming from there, and I didn't know where the leak was. When I touched this old hose and tried to take it off, that's when the nipple broke, or the nipple was already broke. I don't know. Okay. So I'm doing this very differently than the guy who did the internet repair, which I will link. It was 9 years ago. Some people have indicated that it's held up. So using the Dremel tool, I was able to cut this stuff away. Now, here's the problem. I've never used a Dremel tool before. But now that I've used one, I kind of like it, and I wished I would have had one decades ago because it would have been very helpful. In any case, it's so long that I couldn't get it in there. So that's one mistake that I made, is this Dremel tool is clearly too big to be able to get it in there. So I came from the bottom and I did some other stuff, but literally would have been better off to have a different Dremel tool that wasn't as long. I also bought a polishing brush, which is nylon, and that's not steel, it's just nylon to help clean it up. All right, so that was one thing. And that helped get off all the old weld. So when I bought this car, somebody had used JB Weld and patched this all up, and it was leaking less, but it was leaking. And it became noticeable over a course of a couple 100 miles. It didn't show up right away. And the low coolant indicator came on, and sure enough, it continued to come on. And then I found all this leaking here. A friend of mine actually found it for me when I went to do the smog, and he saw it and said that's where the coolant's probably leaking. I thought maybe it was a head gasket. So he pointed that out, and you could see as I pulled away all the old JB Weld goop that he had on there, it leaked worse. And so I thought, well, it's leaking from somewhere. Some people say it's the seam. I don't know what they mean exactly where the seam is when they put these two pieces together, over here or over there, where it typically leaks. But this is a big problem for Saturns. It was stupid of them and short-sighted to use ABS. That was just stupid. But now I have this thing. So as it was before, this space here was filled with plastic, and you can see about how thick it was, right? I don't know if that's even like, I don't know, it's not very much, maybe 1/8 of an inch. And so that was cut away. It would have been better off if I had a hacksaw, but I didn't want to use a hacksaw because I didn't want to put too much pressure on this, bouncing it up and down with the hacksaw. So I found the Dremel tool worked, but I could have had a hacksaw and I would have gotten a nice straighter cut in some of these areas, straight down. So I have this part that also had plastic going from here to here, and it was under there. And what I mean by that is, let's suppose this is the tube that I'm going to stick on there. You couldn't stick it on. The reason you couldn't stick it on is because there was plastic going from the bottom of this to the top of this, right? So that also held it, and then the nipple that came out broke, but it only broke to the point where it wasn't reinforced underneath. So what I did is cut away that area underneath so that I could get this tubing all the way on, and this is the tubing I'm going to stick on there. And then I'm going to pull this zip tie tight on there to hold it, because I don't think I can hold it steady for several minutes. I got to hold it for at least a minute for this compound to start to dry. So if I pull the zip tie tight on there, then I can remove it, but at least it'll hold it down for a little while it's drying. Then I've got these things in place, but eventually I'll slide this. I'll take the zip tie off. I'll slide this down to where the zip tie is now, but I'll remove that zip tie. And then I will tighten it down. But I will also use these zip ties to create a pulling action all around here and the top, and somewhere over here. I'm going to try and see if I can't pull this tube so the tube has, as it were, reinforcement pulling it this way using these zip ties anchored by this. However, this, if you tighten these up, I would challenge you to do so. Tighten these up and look at what it does when it distorts the tube. So you have a nice round tube going on a round tube, and once this starts to distort right underneath that bolt, it becomes flat. That's a problem. That's why I'm using the zip tie and I'm not using this. So that's one aspect of this. Put that over here. Okay, so then the other thing that I'm going to do, you'll notice there's a tube sticking out of here, and if you know anything about these, that tube is not there. In any other application, I may be the only person that's ever done this. Either way. So this is the JB weld, right? It comes out as liquid. There's also marine, which I think you could use marine. I chose to use this, but I probably would have better preferred to use the marine application on the inside. But what I'm doing is I've got a piece of fuel line, the outside diameter of which was about 0.50, and the inside diameter of this tube is about 0.48. Okay, so you need a micrometer to do this sort of stuff, but essentially what I did is I went and bought a bunch of fuel line, and then I used sandpaper and I sanded the outside of the fuel line kind of in a motion such as that. I won't say what that motion's like, but believe me, it took a lot of time. I'm going to say 20 minutes or 30 minutes, and I had to get off a very small amount of material in order to be able to slide this piece of tubing, which is fuel line tubing, all the way down to about here, right? And so I used the JB weld on the outside of this, and I know that this is ABS and people think, well, you don't need primer for this. Purple primer is a very good cleaner. It does a great job cleaning plumbing in order to get off any dirt or debris or grease or oil. Now, the proper way to use purple primer is you put it on the pipe that you're going to weld. So you have a fitting and a piece of pipe, and you clean the pipe fitting and you clean the piece of pipe that's about to receive, the pipe's about to go into the fitting, right? You use the purple primer to soften the pipe. People think that you're just cleaning it, and I've seen plumbers go around and they'll clean all their pipe and all their fittings, and then they just leave the stuff sitting there, sometimes for days, and it has the purple primer on there. And that's stupid. It's dumb. It's not the way this stuff's supposed to be used. Purple primer is to soften the PVC in order to help it weld with the glue. That's how it works. However, it's an excellent cleaner. So if you're going to clean something, like I had an axle boot once on a car that had a pinhole leak, and I wanted to put 100% pure waterproof silicone, I cleaned it really well with purple primer, put the silicone on there, let it dry for a day. Thing held up forever, until the car. I didn't have a car anymore. Years later, never leaked again. So this is only to clean. It's not to soften the ABS. ABS glue goes on ABS. There's no way to repair this with ABS to ABS. I'm going to be using the JB weld. I'll be mixing it up. I'll be sticking some of it right on there. I'll tighten it up with a zip tie. Then later, as I said, I'll tighten up the clamp and try to do some reinforcement, but I want the JB weld to dry. It takes only about 5 minutes rather than something like this goop, which takes quite a bit of time. Then I'm going to do something that is similar to what the guy on the YouTube video did. What he did is he slid his pipe further down. I don't remember in his video if he cut this pipe shorter. I don't remember. I think it's possible to cut the pipe shorter. You could certainly cut quite a bit of length off this pipe. I don't think there's any particular reason that it needs to be this long. However, I'm not sure where the crack is. I have no idea where the actual crack is, because it took a couple hours just to get all the goop off of here. Now, how much goop was on there? A lot. The person basically encased this whole thing with some kind of goop, which was either like a putty, I think, and then put it on there. So the way to use purple primer for an application like this is pretty simple. You just want to clean it, and that's it. So what I'll be doing is putting this on first. The reason why is because that's going to take up some space here, right? And when I put that hose on there, it'll limit how far I can slide this down, okay? It'll block it at some point in time. What I'm planning on doing is sliding this piece of hose over the top of this using the JB weld, right? And then I'm gonna cut this off, by the way, this tube here. That was just to hold it, but that's permanently in there. That's not going anywhere. It's been in there for a long time, hour and a half or two. And what I'll do is have this with this. So this is a 3/4 inch nipple threaded. It's not for this sort of application. In any case, I don't care. So it's made out of metal. It'll last long enough. It'll probably rust. I don't care. And I've got that gasket maker right there. And I've attached this, and so I'll tighten this up a little bit more. But what I'm going to use is the hose, and then I'm going to connect it to this. And so that will be how I'll connect it. My thinking on this is this will provide support to the leaking tube. Once the engine gets hot, everything that has a leak, any gasket or anything else, once the engine gets hot, all this stuff expands. And if I have enough of these on there that don't crush this, but if I have enough of these on there, including farther down, and the weld chemical bond to this tube to this, so the outside of this to the inside of this, once I slide it on there, that'll provide a lot of support and hopefully keep it from leaking or minimize the leaking, right? And then I'll connect this to this, and so there shouldn't be a leak there. And what I've added though is this. Now, I admit the inside diameter of this tube is pretty small. Therefore, it's quite possible that'll change some pressures. It just goes to the heater core and comes back out for the heater core. So why do you need a heater core? Well, picture that you're out on a hot day and you have a glass and you fill it with ice and you put some cold beverage in there. On the outside of the glass, you've probably noticed moisture buildup, right? That's called condensation, I believe. And that's what happens inside your car when it rains. You're inside your car. It's warm, hopefully, because you have the heater on, and it's raining or it's cold or it's foggy outside and you have your windshield wipers on. The inside of your window in your car will condensate. This has happened before. I got a car really cheap. It was a Chevy Impala. Got a really good deal on it. Found out later why. The heater core was completely plugged up with all kinds of stop leak. So that's one thing you want to check. Well, imagine you're driving your car and you can't see out the window because it's raining out here and your windshield wipers are going, and the inside becomes condensated and literally water will start to drip off of here, and you'll have to keep drying the window. That won't last very long. There's a story of Jordan Peterson. He was talking about how they were using vodka on the inside of the window to keep it from fogging up because they didn't have a heater, or it was so cold. I guess it gets to be 40 degrees below zero. So your heater core is important, but the tubing on the heater core is pretty small. And so as long as I can get water through there, heated water through there, some heat will be better. And the leaking that I'm going through now and the risk of overheating, much more dangerous. So my thinking on this is, you know, maybe this is gonna work. Maybe it's not gonna work. I'm not exactly sure. Let me see if I can set this thing up. I'm trying to do a video on this because I know there's other people who are dealing with this. And you know, you don't want to spend $700 or $800 fixing this manifold, and some people have said that they've had problems with this nipple. So what I've done is use the JB weld, and again, I had to narrow this tube by sanding it down using kind of more this motion. I tried putting a screwdriver, a Phillips head screwdriver, all the way through there and doing it different ways, but it seemed easier just to keep pulling using underneath running water actually was the best way, using wet dry sandpaper. And eventually I was able to get the outside diameter of this small enough to where it could slide all the way down. And once it slid all the way down, then I glued it in. So this is kind of inventive. Now this is meant to help reinforce wherever the crack is on the inside, to bond this to this with that glue and hopefully keep the crack from expanding and still allow some water to go through this pipe, which would otherwise be, you know, 19 millimeters, 3/4 inch, allowing lots of flow through the heater core. I have no idea what the dynamics of the flow are going to be affected by this, but probably it's not going to be helpful. I don't think it's going to cause any serious problems, but it can't be any more serious than the fact that the damn thing leaks, and I can't drive 20 miles without losing you know, about 2 cups of coolant at this point in time, because I peeled off all this JB weld. Before that, I could probably go 60 or 70 miles, and that's longer than most test drives. So definitely, if you see any stop leak or you don't take your car on a far enough test drive, you're gonna end up with some kind of problem like this. And you know, I paid cheap enough for the car that even if I have to repair this, it's not a horrible thing, but it does make it as if it were not worth it to get it in the first place. Okay, so let me mix up the JB weld and I'll show you what I'm about to do here. And again, if this was PVC plumbing, you'd want to do this before it really dries. You put on your purple primer, and then you're basically going to try and put on your glue and use it while it's still wet, because it's supposed to soften the pipe. Again, this was the plumber's tape. You're going to need lots of plumber's tape. If you use a Dremel tool, you'll need a plastic cutting wheel, and also you should have a sander on there, and I use this little polishing thing. Okay. Let me get my stuff. Okay, I'm just mixing up the epoxy right now, which basically, I'll show you. You take off that lid, it automatically puts in equal parts. I only need the smallest amount. Okay, so not a lot. And then you stick the cap back on there. Alright, stick this back over here, hopefully it'll stay. And I'm just going to mix it up with, I'll see, I'll use this finger right here. Hopefully I won't have to touch anything. Anyway, gloves for sure for stuff like this. These are chemicals. You don't want to get them in your skin or your body. You might live long enough that you get cancer. Some people say Steve Jobs died of cancer partly because he used to do a lot of soldering when he was younger and might have been exposed to a lot of chemicals. But some chemicals like this, they take 25, 30, 40 years before it starts a cancer. Okay, so I mixed it together. And now what I want to do is stick some of this on the outside of this nipple without plugging it up at the same time. All right, and then I'm going to rip this glove off. And get a little bit of this weld inside this pipe here, or tube hose, right? And hope like heck that this works, because once you put it on there, it's going to start to bond. Okay, so I'm going to push it down pretty tight and hold it, and then pull the zip tie. And try not to move this pipe at all, and just sort of hope it doesn't go anywhere. So 60 seconds, I'm just going to try and calmly hold this. I can actually watch the clock here. So some of the things that I did wrong, I didn't have a hacksaw blade. I should have had one. I should have had a smaller Dremel tool, not as long. I should have had a sanding type of a thing, a cone. They have these little cones. I bought this Dremel tool brand new. I've never used one before. Yesterday was the first day I used one practicing. Would have helped if I would have had one before. Could have used it for decades. They're really cool. Anyway, a little cone shaped thing to help sand. That would have helped sand out part of that part that I needed to remove between the heater return and the rest of the manifold. Probably should have had more plumber's tape, because it ended up becoming quite gummed up from the previous repair. A couple other things, but I can't think. I have this list. I don't know if I showed it or not, but I have a list of all the different parts. So I think this is getting pretty close to a minute. I'm gonna hold it for about another 30 seconds just because I'm not interested in having this not hold, and I'm hoping that as I release the pressure on this thing, it doesn't slide off. There's not much nipple left there, that's all I can say. It says 5 minutes curing time, but it's more like an hour. So I don't want this to move. I don't want it to shift. Okay, 45. I think that's definitely a minute. So now I'm going to back off on the pressure and just let go of it. All right. Now my hope is that that will weld properly. Okay. So now that that's on there, that basically just has to dry. And then I'm also going to tighten this up, as I said. I'm going to let that dry for quite a long time. And then I'll put the clamp over the top of it. And then I'll do the same thing with the JB weld. I might cut that shorter. I actually might cut that tube shorter. I'm not sure how much shorter, but I might cut it using the cutting wheel. I'm not sure. But my point is I want to get the tube the hose, the piece of hose, as far down there as I can. All right, so this is 30 minutes, and if you stuck with it this long, you're probably desperate, and you're in this situation and you're trying to figure out what to do, and I wish you the best of luck. I hope this works. I might have a follow-up video, sort of a part 2, to let people know if this held up or not. Thank you.